You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good day, Geoff.
Good day, Mike.
We're missing somebody this week.
Yeah, but we got somebody great with us instead.
That's right. We've jettisoned Kate Hammer. She's off gallivanting around the old country somewhere. We're pleased to have back to Hotel Pacifico, Aisha Estey.
Thank
Aisha,
you.
welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be back.
Now, for those who don't remember, and how could you not, Aisha was on the pod last October, right after the provincial election. She's a litigation lawyer in Vancouver, but also in her spare time is herding cats as president of the BC Conservative Party. So Aisha's going to join us today as one of the co-hosts, along with Geoff and I, and we'll use her trial lawyer skills to cross-examine our guest here, Mr. Greg Lyle. But before we get to Greg, later in the strategy suite today, we're going to talk about the federal race. We're going to talk about the Penticton-Poilievre rally. We're going to talk about the critical credit rating downgrades in BC, the disappearing Bill 7 debate, and the long voter lineups in Vancouver. But back to Greg. Greg Lyle, again, a return visitor to Hotel Pacifico. We had him on about a year ago. He's the founder and president of Innovative Research Group. We're especially happy to have Greg during a federal RIP period. He brings a lot of huge background in politics and polling to the discussion. He's had many senior leadership roles in campaigns over the years. I worked with him here in BC on Gordon Campbell's campaign. He was principal secretary to Gary Filmon, and on, many other roles. But in the polling business, Greg's firm, Innovative Research Group, has been a leading polling firm for the last couple of decades at least. Does a lot of deep dives, provides a lot of research to the Commons. You don't have to get behind a paywall to see a lot of the great work that Innovative Research Group does. And certainly in this election, if you go onto Greg's LinkedIn channel or go to the website at innovativeresearch.ca, you'll see some interesting background on why people are voting the way they are. Well, I'm not going to pump your tires any more than that, Greg. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Good to be here.
So you just told me before we started recording here that last week Innovative was one of the pollsters that had the race probably kind of in a dead heat, but now you're seeing movement in the latest wave to the Liberals.
Right.
What's behind that?
Pretty clearly the reaction to Trump, and that's been the story all the way along. It has to be very bittersweet for Justin Trudeau and his team. They had told us all in the fall that just wait. Once Trump takes office, people are going to get scared. Once they get scared, they're going to come back to the safe home of the Liberal Party and all this rhetoric where Poilievre has been out there saying things that are a lot like Trump in a similar way to the way Trump says it. It's all going to come back to bite him. And of course, that's been generally true. And one of the things that takes a little bit of the sting out for Trudeau and his team is that the initial recovery of the Liberals happened while he was still at the helm. So we initially saw the Liberals break through in reaction to the February 4th tariff deadline. And they hit 52% approval in the way that they were managing Trump, which was higher than any number we had seen for the federal government since the first year of COVID. And then his hand was still at the tiller March 4th, where the Liberals had another surge. And that time they actually hit 56% approval on the way that they were responding to that. So what's happened is, and I think we all understand this, and there's no pollster that would disagree, is that a new ballot question has broken through. And it's not that time for a change has evaporated, right? People are still having a hard time buying homes. They're still having a hard time paying their bills. They're still concerned about whether healthcare will be there when they need it. They're still concerned about safety on the streets. Those things didn't go away. But now there's a new problem, a new threat in the form of Donald Trump.
I wonder if it means that people would prefer to keep things the way they are. I mean, this is what I've been asking myself because I've heard similar explanations to the one you give, Greg, but people are still concerned about the things Pierre Poilievre is talking about, but somehow the Trump effort, the Trump concern is trumping it completely, trumping, sorry.
Yes.
But does it mean that a different leader, if Trudeau had stayed, for example, a bit longer, that he'd now be back in these stratospheric heights? I find that hard to believe. And I think that the fact that Carney hasn't been able to really break through, although he's really done a great job, does suggest that Poilievre is still channeling a lot of anger in the electorate.
Well, one of the risks when you share polling public is that you go on the record saying things. And so 3 months ago, I took a flight of fancy and I just asked myself, why would Justin Trudeau go through all this? Right? I mean, he's served for 10 years. Why is he fighting so hard to keep the job when it seems so clear he can't win? And so following Trump's win, we asked people, were they excited or afraid now Donald Trump was president? And we asked them whether Poilievre or Trudeau would be best at dealing with Trump. And even then, if you were afraid, more afraid than excited about Trump being president, Trudeau was 5 points ahead of Poilievre. And his net favorables improved by 13 points over the 5 weeks from the first crisis to when he handed the reins over. So I don't think that the Liberals would be in this position because I think Trudeau would have just seen Trudeau would remind people about time for a change, but they would have been in the race.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, the other thing that puzzles me is whether people worry about what the future will be like and have a different view than is on offer from either of the main parties. I mean, Mark Carney's really saying we'll be stronger, more separated probably down the road. This is a definitive turning point, and Canada will be different after this. It won't be the same. Whereas Poilievre's message is really, you're entitled to dream of Canada as it was, maybe through rose-colored glasses, but a house, white picket fence, no crime, drugs are gone, all of those things that basically anybody would agree with. And in that respect, he's also got a stay the course message. But there's a few others out there, Singh is one of them, Jagmeet saying, well, maybe we should talk about what Carney means about a new Canada, what kind of Canada would look like, and what we think it should, who's the best to do that. There's a deeper change message. I think we saw that during COVID too, where everybody said, well, we're going to build back better. We're never sure what that was, but I wonder if that's a deeper question coming up or whether after this is all over, who knows when it will be, we'll settle back into one groove or the other. But I'm intrigued by this question of whether or not Canadians were fundamentally frustrated and are going to be looking to say something about what Canada emerges from all of this turmoil.
There are two different issues there, though. So, first of all, it sounds like you did a little bit of homework on our website because, in fact, we did go back to that question of do we need to reimagine our economy that people were asking during COVID. And that still remains quite strong. And if you're on the center right side of the spectrum, one of the things that's scary is the number of people that believe the free enterprise system is working well has been declining since COVID. And so, during COVID, we had a reason. There was a frame for understanding why times were tough and prices were going up. It was because of COVID. But when the cost of living, people's perception of the standard of living remained bad and some measures got worse after COVID, it caused them to say maybe there's something deeper here. So there's clearly a long-term potential for a Bernie Sanders type movement within Canada saying, is this really the best? The problem that and there's some sign, if you look at our Red Seen Herd, that the ads that the NDP are running that are getting at that point are working to some degree. The problem that the NDP federally have is the same problem that the NDP and the Liberals had in Ontario. they just can't get attention. Unlike the Liberals and NDP in Ontario, the Conservatives have been able to get attention, just not quite as much as the Liberals, because the Liberals are actually doing things in response to Trump, and all Poilievre can say is what he would do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, if I was the NDP, I'd be pretty nervous about the outcome. Um, right now, we're seeing the Liberals winning the sort of social democratic vote, people that hold social democratic values, sort of 2-1 right now. And that really, really limits the space for the NDP in this campaign. And people on the center left seem to quite like Carney, um, even though it seems a little bit of an odd match, given you're talking about an investment banker that did, billions of dollars of deals and ran the profits through tax shelters.
Yeah.
They still seem to like him.
What's in your mind,
Yeah,
Aisha?
yeah, this election has been really fascinating for me because I see it as this contest between what is the soul of this country? Are we, more socialist, or is the, drive for capitalism still there? And it was interesting looking at your polling on the values because it seems like it's pretty much split, of course, but it's it's been very interesting for me to try to reconcile. Okay, so the standard of living has been going down for Canadians since COVID. And we have a politician that's offering a way to rebuild our economy, to grow our economy. But people, that is being totally overridden by fear of Trump. And I guess it's trying to understand how Canadians are justifying, okay, we're leaning towards Liberal, this party that's, we're potentially going to give them a fourth term here if polls keep going this way. And they've been at the helm, and our standard of living has gone down. And, yes, we have a new leader, Mark Carney, who seems to just be kind of floating by, escaping the record of the Liberal Party and riding on his resume. And that CV seems to be so incredibly important to people. Yet, I would argue, when we see in the media, people are comparing, oh, who has a plan, who doesn't have a plan. I would say, we've seen Pierre Poilievre come out with policy announcements almost every single day. I don't think we've seen that from Carney. I don't think we've seen the economic genius from Carney that we've been promised in response to these tariffs or otherwise. But his rhetoric about Americans are bad, America is bad, we're better because we're anti-American is resonating so deeply. And so that's the cognitive dissonance for me, is trying to understand how we have, one party that says this is how we rebuild the economy. We get our resources out of the ground and we start trading them with the world. And then we have the Liberal Party and their leader who has said, he believes in the carbon tax. He was championing it up until 2 months ago. Would probably leave most of our resources in the ground. And I don't see a plan for how that economy grows under him. So seeing the values part of your polling was really interesting to me, because the soul and the identity of Canadians has been something that I've been mulling over a lot. So those are kind of I know I've gone on a little bit there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I do think so. I've got two different reactions to that. The first is that in many ways, elections are job interviews, right? And we are comparing who are we going to put in that job? Because even though the average voter probably wouldn't express it in quite this way, the reality is in our system, particularly if you elect the majority government, most of the issues that that leader is going to deal with are issues that you don't even know what they're going to be. I mean, now it seems like the issues 2 weeks from now are almost unimaginable. We just don't know what the world's going to bring. And so we picked someone who we believe has the skills, but even more importantly, cares about the things that we care about. And I think that's been a big problem for Poilievre, because Poilievre has embraced a style of politics that's very Trump-like, right? So early in the campaign, he was going around talking about carbon tax Carney. And, who's the person that started doing things like that? Well, the answer is Donald Trump, right? Cheating Hillary, lying Hillary. That's Trump's style. And even if we don't study politics, we have a feeling of, whether something fits one person or another. And if you ask the average Canadian, who do you think is best to stand up for us against Trump? The person that says the same sort of things that Trump says and says it the same sort of ways, or the person that doesn't, right? And at that comparison, and there's a very good liberal ad, at least one that I've seen, that draws that comparison. It doesn't really matter what your resume is or what your promises are. It's about the feeling. Is this my gut feeling that this is the person that I can trust to protect the things that matter to us in Canada? But the second issue here is where I think the Liberals are a lot more vulnerable, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. So Carney has actually been saying we need to build bigger and faster. And he's specifically embraced the idea that we need to develop Canada's resources and sell them to the world. So there are two policy weaknesses in that argument. The first is the Liberals have been around 10 years, but done a variety of things that resulted in a number of large projects not happening. And one of the ones that's really critical right now, and I don't understand why the Tories and the NDP, for that matter, are not making more of this, is that one of the aces that we should have in our hand against the United States is oil, right? The United States depends on Canadian oil for 25% of their needs, and there aren't easy solutions. So that should be a real strength for us. But because we didn't build Energy East, there is no pipeline taking Canadian oil to Ontario and Quebec, let alone the Maritimes. So if we were to cut off 25% of the oil that the Americans depend on from Canada, which is a very extreme move, but there's lots of steps going down that road, the Americans can just turn off Line 5.
Yep.
And now Ontario and Quebec don't get 100% of the oil. And that's the end of an economy. Like the economy it's just a matter of days before it shuts down once you cut off the oil supply. So, Liberals were at the helm for the last 10 years and, failed to champion that. Tories all the way along said this is critical. We need it to be independent of the United States. Yet that is not a central issue in this campaign. And then secondly, Carney says that he wants to develop natural resources, but he won't get rid of the IAA, the detailed rules that the Liberals brought in, which, to the best of my knowledge,
Or the
only
emission
one
cap.
project in 8 years has made it through that process. And essentially, I mean, it does things like look at gender impact of building pipelines and stuff. And no one's even going to play that game because at the end of the day, the way the rules are set up, and actually the Tories were the people that did this, is that the final decision goes to cabinet. So even if you play by the rules and spend years and billions of dollars to propose a project, it'll still come down to a cabinet decision. And then the second thing related to that is the emissions cap. So you can't sell more oil and gas to the world if you put a cap on the amount of emissions. And there's a good debate to be had about whether it's better for the environment for Canada to meet the world's need or for others to meet the world's need. We can have a good debate about that, but we're not.
But don't you think the Liberals they're having their cake and eating it too right now?
Totally.
I mean,
Totally. But
I mean,
so that's, good on them for trying to do that.
yeah,
And bad on all three opposition parties for failing to hold them to account.
because as you'll see from your research, and you do a ton of work in energy, is that there is I would argue, a consensus, a majority anyways, for these projects.
Well, but the issue, though, is that if you are the Liberals, and a big reason why the Conservatives are not dropping that much, right? They've dropped a little bit, and they've lost ground with center-right groups like Business Liberals and Deferential Conservatives. But the real secret to the Liberal success of getting ahead of the Conservatives has been the collapse of the NDP
Right.
and the dramatic retreat of the Bloc. And we should talk about Quebec at some point.
Yeah.
But when you look at the NDP side of it, well, and even the Bloc, because Quebec is actually the greenest province in Canada, saying you're going to get rid of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions cap, even though that's only it's a recent policy and that, to the best of my knowledge, is even in effect yet. But saying you're going to get rid of that potentially opens your left flank to the Bloc and the NDP scene. See, this guy is going to water down environmental standards, and so the Liberals are squeezed on that issue. But so far, they've been able to walk the knife edge and have both the people on the left happy with their position and the people on the right happy with their position. That I would be very surprised to see that last through the debate.
Yes, last week we spoke about TELUS's ongoing support of the Government of BC's goal to bring high-speed internet to every household in this province. This week, I want to talk about a more recent expansion of the network into a remote community 105 kilometers northeast of Smithers, Fort Babine. Because high-speed internet is now available for 47 households in Fort Babine, including nearly 6 kilometers of enhanced cellular coverage added along Fort Babine Road. It's all part of a larger provincial initiative to connect rural, remote, and Indigenous communities that is being built and operated by TELUS as the service provider. This project not only provides faster internet and enhanced cellular coverage, but also contributes to sustainable development by bridging the digital divide and empowering communities with essential digital tools for the future, which is something every British Columbian should care about because it ensures equal access to essential services, economic opportunities, and a sustainable future for all communities across the province, regardless of their location. And it's just one more way that TELUS shows up for all of us as BC's hometown team.
Well, just to put an exclamation point on it, the Conservatives are performing ahead of last election for the most part. Plus, they seem to be sucking up the People Party vote to some degree. It gives them maybe an extra couple points. But to your point, the Liberals are feasting on the NDP vote. And in your and for those who have a chance to go see Greg's research on this, he breaks down the population to 6 attitudinal clusters, and one of them is core left. And the Liberals are getting a lot out of people that are core left. So
You're doubling the NDP vote.
So I guess my question on that point, and I'd like to drill down the Bloc too, but on the NDP vote, like how realistic is it that by the time we get to the 28th, that vote is going to hold for the Liberals? Like, do you think do you expect the NDP votes to come home a little bit more before then? Or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen this
I have the
before.
NDP high compared to everyone else. I've got them at
Yeah.
11, and I think the average
Yeah.
among polls right now is 8. And so, that's almost 50% better than the average
Yeah.
poll, even though it's only 3 points. Why are they relevant in this election? Right? I mean, that's the real
Why have
issue.
they ever been relevant?
Well, I think there's
Okay.
but I think the point I made before is I actually think there's a strong long-term case for a left-wing populism, right? I mean, I think we need Horgans and Barretts, at the helm that can make an argument that can reach out both to the white wine socialist group and to the hard hats, right? Who they've sort of surrendered. And you start to see a bunch of industrial cities go conservative, which is, a major shift in the way politics has been going in this country. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But there's a lot of room for the NDP message in this mix.
Well, Greg, I think Aisha will agree with me that only the BC NDP has been declared dead more than the BC Conservative Party.
Right.
But it's don't write any obituaries yet. And I feel in a campaign style, it's very useful for the major parties to talk down the relevance of the NDP. Although I will say, Jagmeet Singh has struggled to create that sense of relevance, to create the sense that he may be small, but he's mighty. And we could talk about that some more. My own view is that probably in the incumbent seats, especially, lots of voters will come back if they feel comfortable that Carney's going to win, and that's not certain yet. But you raised so many points that I'm curious about one sense, and this is a populist question. The oil and gas industry is referred to continuously now as our industry. But we don't have a national energy company. We've never even managed to build an intertie between Alberta and BC, never mind a national grid. I mean, we're now reaping the results, I think, of a lot of decisions that were made very consciously, and people believed they'd be good for us, that we would have the nature of the industry that we have. Is that an area where Canadians would be open to a debate? I mean, Danielle Smith is very, very direct and harsh in her view that Canadians don't get it and they're not buying into the need for the oil industry. But there must be an alternative view because, we all go to the pump and we're furious about how high the gas prices are. We're not really enjoying the fact that the oil companies are deciding those. So I just wonder how much some of these issues could, you saying the populism issue could, or populist sorts of approaches could come forward. Do you think that will happen after the election if people are frustrated with Carney? Because it's certainly not happening in this election.
Well, but the populist vein is there to be mined,
Right.
and it's there today. So the real question is, how much mischief will Trump create between now and election day? Right? So
That's a
we
terrifying
have
question.
we have an ongoing wound in the auto sector, which is, that is going to get big headlines in vote rich Ontario, right? Because that's where the layoffs are happening. So that's going to be big news. There will be less attention paid to any new action on forestry, but that will matter in Quebec and BC in particular. Um, and that remains alive. So even though we don't have a big tariff deadline, which is really the tariff deadlines, where we have the day where we're all glued to TV and waiting to find out what tariffs are going to hit us, those days have been very good for the Liberals.
Mhm.
Every time that happens, the Liberals spike. There isn't another one of those between now and the end of the election. And so that allows us to move back to time for a change. And time for a change was driven by this sense that, in Canada, you're supposed to be able to get ahead in your work if you work hard, but I can't, right? I can't live in the neighborhoods I grew up in. I can, it's just impossible to get ahead. And that's one of the reasons why Polyev is still doing so well with young people, because young people can't get past the pressure in their everyday life of the time for a change.
Mhm.
At the moment, they're not seeing, and we've seen this in a variety of ways. At the moment, the average Canadian doesn't feel a personal threat from the Trump tariffs right now. They're concerned about Canada as a whole. They're concerned about the economy as a whole, but they're not concerned about their jobs or their finances in a big way. Nanos, for instance, tracks consumer confidence on a almost weekly basis, I think. And he sees us relatively low compared to the past 4 years. But compared to, the recession of 2008, 2009, we're still feeling pretty good about our situations. So long as the tariffs don't move into that very personal level, then we're going to move back to time for a change. And there's both a left wing and a right wing response to time for a change.
Yep.
So let's just go back to the Bloc for a second. Because I mean, the Liberals have a two-front war. Well, you could argue
They
they
have
have
a three-front war,
well, three-front war, but let's leave aside the
which is
Conservatives.
hard, by the way.
Well, assuming they're having a head-on with the Conservatives, but they're feasting on the NDP votes, which we covered. But they're 20 points ahead of the Bloc, right? In Quebec, something like that.
Yeah,
And
I'm not sure that I have them 20 points ahead, but they are
okay,
there. I think we have them 14 points ahead. But
yeah,
that means seat gains.
yeah,
Right. But the Bloc is that Quebec to me is the first place if the steam comes out of the momentum that the Liberals have, it's first going to happen in Quebec. Um, it doesn't seem like Carney can open his mouth in French and not put his foot into it. He stumbled in the French debate and in the leadership, where he said the opposite of what he meant, corrected it in real time, wasn't the end of the world. Much bigger deal that he got the Polytechnic massacre wrong and couldn't remember the name of the survivor of that massacre that was his candidate, right?
Right.
I mean, saying that the Polytechnic massacre happened in Concordia, like that, what's the easiest way to show I have no understanding of the culture of Quebec? It's like, that is huge. And then he did another thing that really showed that he's just not plugged in to where Quebec's coming from. They asked him a question in these one-on-one interviews that Radio Canada did, where they said, uh, what do you think Quebecers are looking for? And he started talking about distinct society, right? And he was at the Bank of Canada. He was at Ministry of Finance and then Bank of Canada when they had the showdown in the Commons over the motion on Quebec as a nation. Michael Chong resigned as a minister. It was a big deal at the time. And that was 15 years ago, right? And at that point, that was the end of distinct society. You do not talk about distinct society as a goal for Quebecers after that moment. And really, you shouldn't have talked about it as a goal for Quebecers after 1993. And, here you are, you've got a guy trying to show how connected he is with Quebecers using this completely outdated language. And on top of that, last week, Trump's when one of the reports Trump's got identified the language laws that protect the use of French in Quebec as a trade impediment. And so now the Bloc have got an opportunity to say, this guy does not get us. You need to vote for us so that there's someone in Ottawa that will never go along with trading off the things that matter to Quebec in order to get a deal with Trump.
Right.
So,
I don't
but
understand.
all that being said, no one in Quebec seems to care, right?
Right.
Carney has very good favorables in Quebec right now. He's leading his best to be prime minister. He's strong on, like, none of this seems to matter. But it reminds me, so we had a situation, you'll remember in 2012 in Alberta, Danielle Smith versus Alison Redford. And the Wild Rose campaign kept making stumbles that led to a final stumble where they had a candidate who said gays should burn in a lake of fire. And the issue was it wasn't the first time they did it. It was like the seventh time they had done that. And that issue turned out that they needed seven before, the cookie crumbled. But with 10 days to go before that election, the Wild Rose was 10 points ahead. 10 days later, the Wild Rose ended up 10 points behind. And it was that final straw. And so the question is there going to be another stumble from Carney where Quebecers finally say, this guy just doesn't get us? Now, there's a response to the Liberals, which is, don't worry about that man over there. We're sending a bunch of people in the cabinet and caucus that get Quebec. And so they'll make sure that no one compromises. But that would require a bit of a team message, all the rest of that. So Quebec is really interesting. Carney has made pretty big mistakes already. Blanchette is well regarded in Quebec, has very good favorables. And his problem is the NDP problem. He just can't get his voice heard. In Quebec, awareness of Blanchet and the Bloc is running at about 22%, right? So almost 80% of Quebecers say they haven't heard anything from him.
Mhm. Well, I'm gonna throw it here to Aisha. Aisha, you're obviously a conservative player of provincially. I'm not sure what you do federally, but I'm interested in kind of the psychology of the Conservatives being ahead for so long and then being caught in this reverse position, and at this stage in the campaign where it looks very uncertain, and you're seeing the polls as well. What is the you know what is the conservative base perceiving out of all this right now in terms of the way forward? Like, what is like the question I would have put to Greg? I'm gonna put it to you first, and let Greg respond to you. Is like, what does Poilievre do to improve his fortunes with, what are we at, 20 days left in the campaign?
Yeah, and I think that there's two camps of thought in the Conservative Party, and that's sticking with the change message and what he's been campaigning on, for a number of years, or recalibrating and forcefully taking on Trump and trying to take some of that air out of Carney's campaign. And I think that there's probably disagreements within HQ for the CPC on what to do. I think we all heard those clips of Corey tonight, Doug Ford's campaign manager, talking about that the Conservatives need to figure out what the ballot question is here. And again, the more Trump talks, the ballot question is going to be, what is our response to Trump? And if he doesn't, then it goes back to that change message. So it's a very fine line, and I don't envy trying to decide what the best move there is, because policy wise, the change message I think is a winning one. But when it comes down to people's emotions and when they're afraid, you need to address that fear. And Carney's addressing that fear obviously more effectively than Pierre is right now. So we've got 20-ish days left here. Do you swing for the fences and start going after Trump? Do you cross your fingers and hope that Trump doesn't come after Canada again, or make any more insults our way or any more references about being a 51st state? Or do you just stick to your change message and to your policies? But again, as Greg mentioned, people, it's what are people's vibes? What are people's emotional reaction? What is the psychology behind it? And fear is a very powerful driver, obviously. And not addressing it, I think, is a huge risk. And I think Pierre could probably benefit by addressing that fear a bit more head on, because right now he's ceding that ground a bit. That's kind of what I've been picking up from people's thoughts on which way to go.
I mean, the base still seems fired up. Like they're getting these big crowds out to events and
very committed base.
But
very committed base.
I mean, that gets you to what, 30%, and Greg, what would be the profile of that voter who's hanging in the balance right now? What do you think? Can you put a composite on it?
Yeah, I mean, they're less populous and more believe that politics is complicated and we need to use experts. And so the all that sort of populist rhetoric, the eating the apple in the orchard moments, those sort of things, those are all devastating. And I know the red meat for the base, and you have to turn out the base, right? So there's a balancing act here. But the good news is that there's a lot of issues that sort of center right, less populist, more deferential group, who might be business liberals or might be deferential conservatives in our value analysis. The issue for them is we have this group we call Time for Change liberal voters. They're people that say that we need a change of government in this country, which well over 60% still believe. But right now, we have something like 43% saying the liberals may have their problems, but they're best able to form government. And, 6 weeks ago, that was 30%. And so what the Tories need to do is drive that number down. They need to get, and it's a time for a change message. But they have to do it in the context of Trump, because that's all we're talking about. And so it's, you can imagine a moment in a debate where Poilievre is saying, all of us understand that Trump's strategy of putting tariffs on is only hurting Americans. It's adding to the input costs of business, which makes American business less competitive in the world and raises prices for Americans. That's crazy. But everyone on the stage, except me, doesn't understand that an industrial carbon tax does the exact same thing. No one else in the world is doing an industrial carbon tax. We are going to do to ourselves with the carbon tax what Trump is doing with the tariffs. And just like it's crazy for him to do that. It's crazy for us to do this. There's only one party on this stage that will actually make Canada competitive. Let us become more resilient. Let us become the economy we need to be to have the social services that we want and deserve. That type of message. That's where he has to go. He has to find the wedges, because there has to be a risk to voting for the Liberals. And right now, he's not succeeded in making it risky.
And the irony of it is that Carney's able to have a telephone call with Trump. They both come away saying, "What a great call." Poilievre quite reasonably says, "That's weird. Trump seems to like the Liberals," and everybody just tunes out. It's a peculiar thing because people are basically buying on faith that Carney's resume does have utility in this circumstances, as opposed to where he's used to working, which is at the height of finance. And on the populist side too, Greg, isn't it the case that most Canadians, including, there's a crossover, I would say, between left populist people and right populist people, which is that they're very suspicious of big business.
Right.
We saw that in BC with a lot of Reform BC voters quite comfortable hanging around with the Glenn Clark NDP when it was in its most populist strength. So this goes to your values diagram, and I wondered how often you see that kind of crossover I'm pointing to. A more clear-cut example might be guns. People who hunt consider themselves stewards of the environment. They don't consider themselves rapacious, slaughtering, subhumans. They feel just as passionate about the quality of rivers and so forth as many people who support the Wilderness Committee. But we treat them as separate universes. It just seems to me that there may even be an opportunity for Poilievre, although it's very late in the game, for him to cheer up any New Democrats. They're all very, very worried about him. But to reach out to some of those other voters who may be sitting in different areas of your values network, but have a lot in common in terms of what they think about the world and could be approached by a politician in a different way. We're just not seeing that right now.
Yeah, and we have a cluster, and it's a big cluster, that we call pay-as-you-go moderates. And so, and to me, they remind me of Reform NDP switchers that we used to spend a lot of time thinking about in the 90s. They didn't go away, right? And they're still out there. Some of them are the hard hat vote, right? They're private sector unionized workers in construction or resource or manufacturing.
Vancouver Island.
Yeah, and those people can move directly from the NDP to the Tories and back again. And that sort of group you should be able to get by pinning Carney as a big business elitist, and like the tax shelter stuff. The one thing that we're seeing that's breaking through, but not at the scale the opposition needs, is 2 weeks in a row now we've seen one of the top 4 issues on What Have You Heard About Carney be his assets, his potential conflict of interest, right? And the fact that he took a bunch of assets that he knows well and put them in a blind trust so none of us can see them is going to be something that he's going to have a hard time on in the debate, right? I mean, it just looks like he's got something to hide.
The debates are probably going to be consequential, don't you think? Like, potentially, anyways.
All of us here watch all the debates, and before every debate, we say it could matter. But the fact is, if I go to debates, I have to go to the 80s, right? Or early 90s, right? The last debate that really mattered was Gordon Wilson. And then before that, both the 88 and 84 federal.
2013 was good too.
What's that?
2013 was a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's still, when you think about it, it's I still would not argue that one was as strong. But bottom line, so debates can really matter. And the reason why I say it matters so much this time is Carney's image. So Carney is very strong favorables right now, but our attitudes towards social objects, social actors, are things that build up over time. They're like balls of string, right? And right now, Poilievre's attitudes, that's a big ball of string. Every time you add another string to it, it doesn't make much of a difference because there's so much already there. But for Carney, there's not that much there. And so a new bit of information can make a big difference. That's why in 2012, with the Wildrose and Danielle Smith, he had two relative unknowns, a new party and a new leader. They learned something very negative about that party and they switch. And so Carney is still vulnerable to people learning new information. And so, you can understand why he didn't go for the one-on-one debates with TVA.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It could make a real difference.
Well, before we let you check out of the hotel here, Greg, I want to just shift gears to provincial politics. And we obviously saw a fundamental realignment last year in the provincial election. And, we've canvassed it extensively here in previous episodes about why that happened and how it happened. But where do you see it going from here? The Conservatives are settling into opposition. There's been a little bit of a house cleaning recently with three of the MLAs, but BC United's lurking. We don't know what's happening with them. There's a new political party, Centre BC, that's been created by Corinne Kirkpatrick, former MLA. What's in your crystal ball?
Yeah, I mean, unless someone can dust off the old Liberal brand and get it back on the ballot, um, I think we're into a new pattern for now. I think any other brand is going to have a very hard time establishing itself. I mean, the provincial government approval right now is 60%, right? It's even though the vote is not that wide, the gap, the last I saw, the NDP had a 6-point lead over the Conservative Party. But the underlying numbers are very good. Their Trump response has gone over very well, just like they got a big rally in COVID. They're getting a big rally on this. Every now and again, they make a misstep, like Bill 7, but EB's been quick to retreat when he gets in situations like that. He very visibly got rid of the carbon tax, even though in theory it still exists federally. He didn't let that get in the way of getting rid of it. So, I think he's been pretty nimble. He has made the odd false step, but he's not so proud that he doesn't retreat when he needs to. And, the Conservatives will still have to wait and see how they can deliver. Are they going to get caught in the Poilievre trap? Right. And the name Conservative is a potential issue for them. So in British Columbia, in fact, all across the country, there's a free enterprise majority, right? So if you ask people what's more important, creating an opportunity to redistribute wealth, there's always more people that say create opportunity, not redistribute wealth. If you ask Canadians and British Columbians about the profit motive, though, you get a more complicated world. And so you get this cluster that we call left liberals, Sheila Copps liberals, I always think about them as, that are want to create opportunity, but look at the profit motive as a means to an end. They're very open to a Bernie Sanders type, fight the man type message. It's just that David Eby doesn't look like John Horgan, right? Like he just doesn't look like a populist. But there's still lots of ways that Eby can connect with him, and in fact, at the moment he is. And the issue is, how does John Rusted connect to those people as a big C conservative? Are they going to feel affinity, or is that because under the BC Liberals would sort of split that vote with the NDP, and because of all the other groups that are out there, that was fine. They could win even if they split that vote. So that's going to be the challenge for Rustad and his team. I mean, one thing that I think is a reality about conservatism today compared to conservatism 20, 30 years ago is that I think it's going to continue to have a strong populist element, and it's going to be uncomfortable for big business, right? That whole message of, don't send your fancy pants lobbyists to see me go down to Tim Hortons and the ice rink and convince the average person, and then you'll get my attention. That's something that was core to the BC Conservatives' success in outflanking the BC United. and taking over the center right, because they got those populist conservatives uh, very excited and motivated. That will always be a core strength. It's just a balancing act. Okay, how do I keep them happy, giving me my volunteers, making donations, but not go so far down that road that I'm only appealing to them. And right now, federally, Poilievre only wins his best to be prime minister among populist conservatives. Carney beats him in every other group, 5 other clusters.
Well, I've got a
Brad,
question for that, and Aisha may want to chime in, but my perception is that the BC Conservatives have sort of three main currents. And I wonder if you see that in your value sets. There's sort of center-right people who are very comfortable with the BC Liberals, who are part of the not NDP group, but they may be very, progressive lefty on various other issues, SOGI and all that kind of stuff. There's a group of, I would put them more like Reform BC people who are resource workers and so on, and are concerned about that part of the economy and so forth. And then there's a group of what I would call issue conservatives who have come to the movement because there's a possibility there to talk about whatever issues on their mind. It could be SOGI, or it could be vaccines. It could be a whole bunch of other things where they overlap a little bit with broader public concerns, but they have their own concerns in a very militant way. That strikes me as a tricky group to manage. I mean, to give John Rustad a charitable opportunity here. And I don't see that kind of diversity of opinion in some of the other groups that are out there. For example, I don't see it the same way in the NDP.
Well, Aisha, what do you think of Geoff's characterization of the BC Conservatives?
I would agree. I think that it is a coalition and there is a variety, especially on like the social conservatism. Some people, I mean, I would even consider myself maybe now social conservative. I would be a social conservative. Back in the day, I would say I'd be, more center liberal. I mean, the political spectrum has shifted a little bit, but I think that those three groups are relatively accurate. And it was really interesting, having those three MLAs left, who I think what we've seen come out of them so far has been very issue based, very issue specific. Does that maybe move the BC Conservative Party more towards the center for some people who are less like that kind of populistic rhetoric? Maybe. Time will tell, and we'll see how John Rustad, messages compared to those three that have left. I don't know if they intend on starting their own party up or if they'll just continue sitting as independents. But that is kind of the age-old question I know we sort of discuss is, okay, how do we appeal to more of the, what the people who populism doesn't appeal to? And I think that's, fiscal policy is a really simple way to get that across, and less of the, social conservative points. So, it's something we wrestle with a lot, but I think that characterization is pretty accurate actually of who composes our tent, and trying to manage and appeal to all three of those groups is a very difficult balancing act.
Not easy putting 45% together.
But I'll just, so to make it even a little bit more complicated, I would argue that party exists at a junction of 4 different value domains. So one that is the easiest to build a coalition around is economic opportunity, free enterprise. There's, lots of people in that universe. The second one is fiscal conservatism, and that one is historically challenging, right? Because you can scare people if you push too far on the fiscal side. That's always been, it's clearly a part of the conservative position. There's social conservatives, and typically when we talk about social conservatives, we're talking about things like abortion, family issues, stuff like that. And Stephen Harper showed that you can find issues that leave the social conservatives feeling like they're getting something without going so far as to scare women about their right to choose. And the minute you don't send a clear message on right to choose, you're pretty much guaranteeing you won't win government unless the other side is determined to lose. But the last element, which is I think what was central to this latest cleavage within the conservatives, is cultural conservatism. And cultural conservatism comes across a number of different ways. In this case, it came through Indigenous issues. And this will be a tricky issue going forward, because there's an issue of sort of respect that the three who left sort of missed, right? So they seem to be caught up in having a debate over exactly how many of these disturbances in Kamloops are actual graves, and arguably that misses the point. Um, there's a lot of horrible things that were done as matters of policy to Indigenous people in this country, and it's created generational upheaval that will take generations to heal. And what they need to hear is that we understand all that. Then where the debate will happen is exactly what does that mean in terms of ongoing rights. But we need to start with an understanding that for better or for the worse, the premiers and the prime minister in the early 1980s entrenched undefined Indigenous rights in the Constitution. So these are now constitutionally protected rights that aren't going away. And so, if you have that, you have to start with a position that is empathetic, respectful, pragmatic. And there are some people that just reject that. It's just, to them, everyone should have the same rights and freedoms, and they just can't get their heads around a reality that you have to get your head around if you're going to govern. And so, as it stands right now in this province, there aren't many people that would make that their litmus test. That there were actually three in caucus is a bit surprising.
Well, Greg, lots to digest. We could go on a lot longer with you, but eventually we'll have to go back to our day jobs here today. Thanks for joining us again. Appreciate your insights. Appreciate everything you're doing to inform people who want to be informed about what's behind public opinion. And again, I'll say innovativeresearch.ca and Greg's LinkedIn accounts are good ways to get access to really deep treasure trove of public opinion research during this campaign. So, Greg, until next time,
thanks very much, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting.
Great to visit with everyone.
Guess another pop quiz from Fortis BC coming to you today. There's nothing more I like to talk about than science. Now, that would be political science, but today I've got some real science, and you're going to have to reach way back to your high school chemistry class for this one. What is the chemical compound CH4 known as? CH4. Any of you know that? Because I know most of you are like me, probably spending more time in arts classes than science classes, but here's a hint. It means this compound has one carbon atom bonded to 4 hydrogen atoms, CH4. And what do you call that? The answer, methane. Or most folks call it natural gas. Now, next question. What would happen if we developed a process to separate those carbon atoms from the hydrogen atoms? Well, I personally don't have a clue, but the answer is you would have a process that produces low carbon hydrogen. And that's what our sponsor, Fortis BC, who does know a lot about this stuff, is working toward. Last year, Fortis BC began testing new technology at one of their sites in the Kootenays with the goal of bringing a large-scale hydrogen production facility to BC. The pilot project was enabled by funding from the province of BC's Clean BC Industry Fund and is a partnership between Fortis BC and the Hazer Group, an Australian technology firm. Referred to as the Hazer process, this new hydrogen technology uses a process known as pyrolysis to break apart natural gas into both hydrogen and solid carbon. The hydrogen can then be used in the existing gas system, while the solid carbon could be used in myriad commercial and industrial applications. And it is yet another example of how harnessing the strengths of the existing gas system will support the decarbonization objectives of Fortis BC and the province. Innovative technologies such as the Hazer process have the potential to create new economic opportunities. With testing in the Kootenays now complete, FortisBC and Hazer are looking for a potential site in BC for a commercial-scale Hazer hydrogen plant. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
You've been busy, Mike.
I have been busy, double shifting. Battle for BC pod that we're doing on Sundays. Myself and Richard Sussman. We covered off the south of Fraser ridings, plus Pitt Meadows Maple Ridge last week. So this week we are going to look at the rest of the Fraser Valley, including the Mike DeYoung, Brawlford and the rest of the interior north that we haven't talked about yet. So there'll be some interesting races to cover. I encourage everyone to check it out when we drop it.
It's very entertaining. I highly commend it. I'm expecting you guys to start telling me which candidates have the best sign captain. You got such granular knowledge.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that next week, as part of our coverage of the interior and the north, we are also going to cover the Yukon. So for our Yukon listeners, there's listeners, there's more than one. A special treat for you coming up this weekend. So beware. But back to Strategy Suite. So let's start with the federal race in BC. Actually, you know what? I want to talk about the federal race across Canada for a second. There was a poll that came out last week from Angus Reid that talked about separatist sentiment in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And there was a bit of a kerfuffle on the campaign trail about it. But Geoff, I'll throw it to you first. Like those numbers in Alberta and Saskatchewan weren't insignificant in terms of people who'd say.
Well, they weren't insignificant in BC either. But I've lived here 50 years, and maybe I've led a sheltered life, but not a single person has said to me, the whole problem is we should break away from Canada. So I just was shocked that it came up the way it did in Preston Manning's intervention. And then I got a chuckle out of the post that led to a minor storm at the legislature by one of the conservative MLAs who showed a map of Western Canada, like a notional view of what a separate Canada would look like. And he left out Vancouver Island. So I thought, well, it's hard enough to create a new country, but if you can't agree to keep Vancouver
There
Island,
were separate colonies before, Geoff. Let's not forget that.
Well, I just want to know where they put Kerrisdale in that. Is that sort of the Monaco of?
Aisha, you're from Vancouver Island. Would you want to separate from the rest of Canada, like create a separate Vancouver Island? Be an interesting political regime there, I think.
It would be very interesting, and I definitely don't think there's much sentiment, if at all, for that on the island. That's for sure.
But we know we have enough cross-pollination with, especially hearing from conservative Daniel Smith and Scott Moe, Alberta and Saskatchewan. Like the conservative side especially is pretty pissed off with the way things are going at a federal level. And if the Liberals get reelected, a certain group of them are going to be pretty riled up. What do you make of that, Aisha?
Absolutely. I mean, even during the provincial election, you learn so much about the different regions of the province. And we referred to, the north and the interior, much thinking of them as, sort of Albertans and Alberta-style conservatism. So it doesn't surprise me that there are parts of BC where that sentiment is on the rise. And I think that generally it's really sad. We've got, a large portion of our population out here in the West, are not insignificant, that feels completely disrespected by the federal government and by Ottawa the last few years, and undervalued and underappreciated for how much they contribute. And I wish that, we've seen some of the rhetoric from Carney the last few days. I think at his rally that he was at in Victoria, I think one of the most important jobs of a prime minister is that unifying message. It's keeping the country together. It's treating everyone fairly. And he's stoking, kind of poking the bear a little bit in the way that he's spoken about some premiers. And this does not help these sentiments for separation. So I think that it's generally just a very kind of, sad reality that a lot of people feel that. And it would be nice to hear Ottawa finding some way to try to improve that. And improve that from the people running to be prime minister right now. And I think Carney was messaging the opposite. So I don't know. I think that was a misstep by him.
Well, it might make his job, if he's reelected, a little tougher dealing with those provinces. But in the meantime, Geoff, he paid a little visit to the Premier's office this week. And and met with Premier Eby. And sidebar, I noticed in one of the photos that there is now a conference table in the Premier's personal office.
Hmm.
Was that something
Yeah.
you did, or is that
Well, there was
Eby
always a
made
big
the?
table there that was
Was
there
there?
when we got there, but this is,
Okay.
they seem to have updated
Thought
it
they might have a new
somehow.
interior decorator there, I thought maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. People like you and I pay close attention to that kind of stuff. Well, there was a funny, I got a chuckle also out of the dance that was done this week. I thought pretty well by Premier Eby endorsing the NDP incumbents, which avoided putting him at odds with the federal Liberals and Mark Carney, who undoubtedly are begging him to endorse a bunch of the new arrivals on the scene. Like one who I worked with very closely for a number of years is Gregor Robertson, who was the target of a whole bunch of conservative attacks, but understandably because he was on Stephen Quinn, and Stephen Quinn said, "You never used to like pipelines. How come you like pipelines now?" And Gregor's record on that front is pretty crystal clear. But he just said, "Yeah, I've changed my mind," basically. Quite an astonishing reversal, but that's nobody seems to mind particularly, and I think they expect to get a number of seats. I noticed that he also, Carney, that is, went to campaign in Elizabeth May's riding, and certainly that's a three-way fight where they have some reason of hope.
Might be a
Although it's been
four-way fight,
conservative in
yeah.
the past, I think more
Yeah.
recently it's been conservative though federally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I wouldn't, the NDP have a strong candidate there too,
Hmm.
who obviously can be hamstrung if he's not getting any air support from the federal campaign. But this notion of orange liberals, right? Like there's this harmony, it seems to be taking place between the provincial NDP and the federal liberals. And, it was a bit of a lovey-dovey kind of press event with the EB and Carney. And is that basically the same thing provincially, isn't it? Like are we beginning to see, the center left group behind that type of politics with the federal liberals moving to the left, incorporate that as part of their federal coalition, the provincial NDP wanting to embrace federal liberals as part of their coalition, and then everybody else is over here, except for the Greens, everybody else is over here at the Conservatives. Is that
Well, I
what
don't
you're
know.
seeing?
I don't know what Aisha's experience has been. I found sometimes that when conservatives and New Democrats find themselves alone together, they have a pretty good time agreeing about how much they all despise the liberals. And there's more in common there. Both conservatives and New Democrats consider themselves, in my experience, more principled than liberals. And I won't say where I fall on that spectrum, but in my own political career, I did a lot of work with liberals in Vancouver because there's not a very large conservative movement in the town, particularly at the municipal level, and so all of these things shift around quite a bit. But I do think that in the ridings where there are NDP incumbents, there will be a gravitation of voters back to the NDP, especially if they feel that Carney is going to be successful anyway. So that's a big problem for Pierre Poilievre because I don't think his vote is as efficient. We may get into this air and gun discussion later, but from the standpoint of campaigning, no one can hold a candle to gun in terms of all the work he did over the years to build a huge following on social media and elsewhere. Whatever you think of his opinions, and some people despise them, he really, really has a big machine and an organization up there. And one thing that we didn't ask Greg about, but is does the size and sophistication of the federal conservative machine overcome the inefficiency of the vote? It's something I'm not in a position to judge, but Aisha's talked before about, the fact that the BC Conservatives were really building the plane as they took off. That's not true for the federal Conservatives. They've been running a very sophisticated campaign for some time. So I think a concern for a lot of people will be, well, they're tied, and that's close, right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as far as, the CPC's been campaigning for years now. Don't underestimate how much data they've collected on every single person that's ever expressed some sort of conservative sentiment that aligns with their policies. And they're going to be making sure that all of the data that they've collected, they're translating that into get out the vote. And, going back to the cozying up of, the red orange, I think that, the climate and environmentalism can maybe be considered, a driving force behind that. I think that EB probably relates to Carney on that front. Carney, last 5 years, I think all of his, work in finance has been on promoting clean energy and trying to direct investment towards clean energy projects or investments. And so that's why I'm extremely suspicious of his dropping of the carbon tax down to zero. I think that was purely just a play for votes. It was unpopular. They had to get it off of the ballot question, basically. But he was championing it 2 months ago. And I think we saw EB very reluctantly, even in a press conference, kind of looked sad about having to get rid of the carbon tax, even though that was a promise he made in the election a few months ago. So I think that the environmentalism part could maybe be something that's driving some voters maybe to the Liberals, and they're kind of ignoring this banker and aspect of him. But it would be interesting to see the kind of the polling on that and why NDP seem to be moving to the Liberals. But
Aisha, what's your gut like? I'm interested in your gut feeling, having gone through the provincial campaign where you went through a lot of rough weather over, candidate issues, Brent Chapman and et al. And the media made a lot of it. And yet, on election night, there was the Conservatives almost taking the prize. And, Geoff brought up Aaron Gunn, drawn into some controversy this week for past statements. What's your read this time in this election? Do you think the voters are also ignoring those plots in the same way and just it's just noise, or do you think the mainstream media is taking a bite out of the federal Conservative campaign?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, when we were in it, and I think the general sentiment, and I mean, with viewership and everything, mainstream media hasn't, I don't think, ever had less influence. They still have some, obviously, and especially for that, Liberal vote, the older generations, they're still watching, mainstream media, and it's, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think, I mean, it's different. I think if people are trying to cancel you and get you fired as a candidate for posts you made on social media 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I think voters generally are, we've all said things in the past that we might not repeat today, and they don't think people should be punished for that forever, and that they shouldn't be allowed to work or something because they've said some things in the past. But I think that, we've seen Carney's gaffes. Those aren't social media posts. Those are, his knowledge of Canada and Quebec. And I think that, the CBC and some mainstream media are definitely a little bit more friendly to the Liberals. So that's a disadvantage that the Conservatives have. But it's those alternate forms of media, podcasts such as this. I think we haven't seen Pierre do too many of those. We've seen a couple more long form interviews, but the media landscape has changed, and I think that we really tried to grasp that provincially, and I think we could have even done more of it afterwards. I thought, we should have been advertising, just even if it's not an interview, advertising on more podcasts or things that reach younger voters, because I think that it would be really interesting to see the turnout for the younger generation compared to the boomers or the 55 plus. Because politics seems to be so much more prevalent in our lives. And I feel like a lot of people used to not decide who they're going to vote for until, a couple of days before the election. They don't like thinking about politics usually. But I feel like it's hard to avoid nowadays.
Well, I always wonder what the polls aren't picking up, frankly, and having done a lot of polling, sometimes, like, I do think the Conservative vote generally gets undervalued heading into election day. Like, I think they often overperform the polling numbers on election day, and it might be just they're less likely to reveal their true intentions when they answer a polling question or won't do the poll. There's a lot of different theories about it, but I was on Facebook the other day and I saw some high school friends reporting quite cheerily that they'd just been to the Jordan Peterson event in Abbotsford, or they're like, I don't know, 4,000 people going to see Jordan Peterson speak in Abbotsford. And it's like, well, those are 4,000 voters, and there's probably all over the Lower Mainland, and they're probably most of them probably aren't voting for the Liberals, So it's
Yeah.
it's like
It speaks to
it's like
motivation, right? Because it's
well, people are
the
showing up to Poilievre's rallies. Like there's a movement there. It's just how big is this? Does it got a hard ceiling to it?
Yeah, and is it going to challenge the, supposed voter efficiency of the Liberals? Because from if we're looking at crowd sizes, uh, the intensity and the commitment and the motivation, I think, pretty clearly seems very strong and stronger for Pierre than for Carney. But the voter efficiency, okay, now you need to get everybody actually out to vote.
Yeah,
Will that intensity override the
in the
efficiency
burbs.
maybe of Liberals? Yeah.
Yeah, no point winning big in Alberta, frankly.
No, I
Um,
Yeah.
I don't think federal Liberal voters are rally people. I mean, there's a class
no,
distinction there too, like
yeah.
out in the valley and Penticton and places like that. And if 4,000 people show up and they all put it on their Instagram account and on their Facebook account, that's a staggering amount of validation that goes out into the system.
Yeah.
And if people have been uneasy about Poilievre for some reason, it really will settle them down to go, oh, 3 people from my legion are also there, something like that.
Okay, well let's take a quick a breezy look at BC politics before we sign off the suite here today. Uh, can't let it pass that BC's credit rating was downgraded twice last week. Brenda Bailey, the finance minister, blamed the dispute on the Trump tariff situation. And I'm thinking like, I don't think it actually has anything to do with that. This was a problem before the tariffs things happened in January. So, Geoff, big deal, not a big deal. What's your sense?
Well, it's a big deal, but not a big deal politically. It's a big deal in policy
Not yet,
terms.
anyways. Yeah.
It's been surprising to me over the period of time. I mean, when you look at the performance of the BC economy and the budget through COVID and everything, it's been up and down. And this didn't get too much coverage, even in the people among people who normally pay attention. Of course, Von Palmer did. But I do think that the difficulties inside the BC budget, including, I can't explain to you what happened to how that carbon tax money would be replaced, for example.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shoes to fall yet on this, and I guess at the first quarter we'll find out. But by then, it may be the case that the doubling of tariffs on softwood lumber, which is I think what it was, has put a further hole in the resource revenues, and it'll be very difficult to sort out what was Trump and what was something else.
So, Aisha, there's obviously Bill 7's been a hot topic, and the government backed down for some of the contentious amendments there. And there was a big Bill 7 second reading debate shaping up. But were the Conservatives having movie night or something? Did they miss the memo? Was somebody having nap
Yeah.
time, or what happened there? What happened?
Yeah, I think that we saw, a little bit of an experience on display regarding that, unfortunately. So that was an embarrassing mistake. And if you make a mistake and you're embarrassed by it, you're very much less likely to make that in the
Yeah.
future. Luckily, on third reading, I mean, we're intending on taking 70 to 80 hours or so. So not a huge loss because there's
Well, they
still
got the
lots of
clause by
questions to
clause
come.
debate too, which they can.
Exactly.
Are they saying they would debate it at third reading? Is that what they said as
We're
well?
Yeah, they're intending to drag this out till the
I
end of
guess
session.
I guess
So
that's possible. Hey, Jeff, like third reading is just usually a formality, but I guess you technically can debate it at third reading.
Well, I think it's been a gift for the Conservatives, and I think we worried about it. I fretted about it when it was first introduced, and
Yeah.
it certainly was a welcome arrival for John Rustad because it's basically shut down discussion of the difficulties he was having with Dallas, Brody, and so forth. But the government has got a problem with Part 4, which it can't really bring in, and it's still not clear whether the government's decided to drop it, although that's what the premier said would happen, or whether they would actually try to keep it somehow. There's been no amendment brought forward to drop it. So that's helpful for Peter Millibar and the others who are fighting this on the Conservative side. And it's not clear that the bill is needed at all for the other reasons, to toll trucks or to deal with interprovincial trade. I don't think people have been compelled by those. They don't really care that much about them. The business community is kind of okay with the intergovernmental relations thing. So we'll see. But I'm not surprised, frankly, that the government doesn't have a lot of marquee items out there. This was one, it's come into some serious trouble. So I'm not surprised the Conservatives would like to keep discussing it as long as possible. There's no other big bills in front of the House right now that I've identified.
Aisha, do you live in the city of Vancouver?
I do, yes.
Did you get a chance to vote on the weekend?
Yes, I did.
How long did you
I
wait?
did, despite the lines.
How many times
Over
did
an
you have to
hour,
try?
over an hour.
Oh.
Oh
You
man,
were over an
luckily I had
hour.
nothing else going on
What
that
about you,
day,
Geoff?
but
Well, I went into the advance poll
Oh,
where,
did you? At
which was
City
also
Hall?
quite long at City Hall. And somebody came up and said, "You look like a senior." Normally I would say, no, I don't at all. You have the wrong person, but it meant I could go to the front of the line. So I did.
Wow.
I played the senior card.
Yeah, I should have done that. I'm actually in the Vancouver Sun. I'm in
Oh,
the news coverage. Somebody behind me took a picture and it showed up in the Vancouver Sun. So I'm quite pleased that I was on my phone, of course. I was actually tweeting about the lineup when someone took a picture of me. But I was an hour and 36 minutes. I went to False Creek and I saw a ridiculously long lineup of an hour. And I said, well, I'm going to beat the system. I'm going to drive out to West Point Grey, where nobody lives out in West Point Grey because of the low density and oppressing young people by not providing affordable housing out there. And it was an hour and a half. Sheesh, who are these people?
but to get past the administration, 2 years ago, I thought, okay, Ken Sim has this massive majority. We're going to have Mayor Ken Sim for 2 terms. Right now, I don't like his chances going into the next election. He shed a whole bunch of people from Park Board, which would take too long to explain. They expelled Rebecca Bly, who's quite respected, a member of their own caucus, just before the election. The campaign manager said it was basically to clean the place up a bit before they went into battle. It was not a good look. The mayor's tried to explain what's going on here, but he's taken an enormous mandate and made the least of it so far. And I think that we'll see the spotlight shift finally to the left, which has made the least of its own opportunities over the last couple of years. To see if they can
ABC's
put anything
identity
together.
is a question, right? Like
Yeah.
they won with a very broad coalition of people that just want to get rid of the incumbent regime, basically,
Kennedy
right?
Stewart. Yeah.
But like, I don't know, Aisha, like, do BC Conservatives see ABC as their vehicle? Some might have voted
yeah,
Team,
I mean,
maybe.
yeah, I think the sentiment among those of us who voted ABC and had faith in Ken Sims have been very disappointed. And so hopefully this maybe it will scare him a little bit into some action, into some movement. But yeah, it's something that we should, provincially, I think maybe pay some more attention to
Because the
and
MPA
throw some
the
more weight
MPA didn't
behind.
show up to this by-election, which surprised me. I thought maybe the MPA might throw a candidate on the ballot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the results of this were I think maybe surprising to everyone, definitely surprising to me. But I think that, wake up call, Ken Sims. They're coming for you next, and they're very well organized.
We
So
should give credit where credit's due to Sean Orr, who was elected as COPE candidate and who had run under the banner of Vote Socialist in 2022. Actually did pretty good as a socialist in that election. He wasn't that far behind Bill Thielman, quite frankly. And ironically, and Lucy Maloney, who was elected in one city. And, one city and COPE, they just proved the value of organizing. I mean, as bad as the voter lineups were, it was only 15% voter turnout. And so 15%, that means, 85% didn't vote. So the ones who showed up get to choose who the candidate was.
Well, it also underlines one more time the enduring value of a brand because Cope failed to
Yeah.
elect anybody in the last round. And then in comes Sean Orr, he tops the polls and gets, I think 3 or 4 times the number of votes of the ABC people.
Oh, yeah, they got smoked.
Yeah.
So congratulations, Councillor and Councillor Maloney. Well, with all that, it's been a busy show. We should probably head to the minibar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Okay, I'm going to raise a glass very quickly here to the Mayor of North Vancouver City, Linda Buchanan. She was in the paper recently with Ravi Kahlon, who I've talked about before. He's the housing minister, but announcing a big project of about 147, 148 housing units that went from concept to completion in, I think, under 2 years. a very dramatic cut in the approval times thanks to some of the changes that have been made. So I want to raise a glass to Mayor Buchanan and her council for showing it can be done. I couldn't explain to you all the levers they pushed and buttons and so forth, but that's very good news. So congratulations to her.
Okay. Aisha.
I know I said I was going to take a shot at someone, but I think I have to raise a glass again to my old friend, Aaron Gunn. I think he's been put through the ringer a bit the last few weeks. I know it was very stressful, but I think we're on the other side of it. And I think that it's an example that, you stand up for what you believe in. You can defend yourself properly. And, this attempts at cancel culture are weaning, and so proud of him for standing up for himself. I'm happy that the Conservative Party stuck by him.
Your old high school buddy.
Yes.
Those ties run deep. And for me, I'm going to raise a glass. This kind of caught me by surprise. There is a citizens assembly in Saanich and Victoria that have been meeting. I think there's 48 of them on the citizens assembly, and they recommended to their municipalities that Victoria and Saanich amalgamate. And I was thinking, where did this come from? And now they're talking there'll be a referendum, and if they choose to amalgamate, there will be a new, like, who's talking about amalgamation these days and actually doing anything about it? So I'm like, ding, 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 Metro Vancouver, pay attention to this. Maybe this is a pathway for Metro Vancouver to put it in the hands of regular people to at least give an opinion on how we govern ourselves in Metro Vancouver. Because if Victoria and Saanich can agree on a process and actually endorse, there's some validity to the findings, then why not Metro Vancouver? So there you go. Anyways, thank you. Thank you to all our guests for checking us out and checking into the hotel today. Thank you to our guest, Greg Lyle, to our presenting sponsor TELUS and Fortis BC. And thank you, Aisha, for joining us for the entirety of the episode today. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.